Hey, now I'm Geoff Noonan. I'm the supervisor for the Electronic Crimes Task Force, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I'm with the Secret Service. A lot of people don't know, Secret Service has a dual mission. We protect the president, which everybody knows, but we also have an investigative mission, which we'll talk about a little bit later on our investigative mission. But I'm based in Los Angeles and co-located in the Ernst Young building. So,
cool. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Renana Freidlich. I'm a senior manager with Ernst Young. Over the past 13 years, I've been focusing on incident response, meaning I helped companies either respond or recover from cybersecurity incidents, as well as help them prepare for the day they're going to get breached. So today, we're going to be giving a presentation with the Secret Service about our lessons learned, some of the things you can probably learn from going through these experiences. And hopefully you can take these lessons learned and implement them within your organization. Now, I guess before we get started, just a quick question. Raise your hand if you're part of the public sector. Okay. I see that few individuals didn't raise their hand, so I'm assuming you're part of the governance, right? Government? Okay, great. So I guess we should get started, right? So a little bit about the agenda and what we're going to be covering here today. So first of all, we're going to start by describing the enemies. And for those of you who are part of the public sector, this is probably a known and very well-discussed space. What do they want? And then really we're going to focus this presentation on some of the war stories. We'll share the experience that EY brings, but we also want to hear a lot from the Secret Service about what are some of the things you do. And when we were preparing for the presentation, we really had a unique opportunity to look at it from both angles, right?
yeah, so basically you guys kind of are figuring out how people got onto your network, but then we're taking it, how they got on, but how they got out, what they took, and then going out for prosecution. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. You coming to this conference, looking at the different lecturers, it's an amazing group. So I'm not going to sit up here and pretend to be an IT expert, but what we do is investigate people that use cyber as a tool to steal. And what they steal from you is what we hope to find out today.
Yep. So at any point in time, feel free to ask questions. We're here to have a conversation, and hopefully it's going to be a meaningful conversation for all of you. Yes?
Well, you just gave that explanation on what you guys do. How is that different from what DHS does? So if somebody gets into my company, DHS would gather all the information if I need them to and do a forensics and see how they got in and what they got and stuff like that. Is that the same thing you guys would do, or you guys work together? Or?
Yeah, so the electronic crimes, there's multiple agencies that conduct, what field are you in? So, Water, okay. So DHS will probably, either DHS or FBI, because of the critical infrastructure component, will be your avenue for investigative. Obviously not one of the city or states. The reason ECTFs are so important, because cyber is so confusing. So who's private sector, financial institutions? What are the infrastructure people we have here? So we have water, power, city municipalities, local government. There's all these different avenues or industries that have different law enforcement. So the genius of an ECTF is we've taken all of those law enforcement, we've combined them. So LA specifically. Los Angeles ECTF has Secret Service, FBI, DHS, then you have LAPD, Orange County Sheriff's, District Attorney's Office, both in Ventura, LA, DA, we have the U.S. Attorney's Office. So my point is there's 18 different agencies, and you don't know who to call. I don't know who to call, but I have a long hallway I can walk down and go, hey, the dam just got breached. Oh, you need to call Bob over at HSI. They do infrastructure security. Hey, Sony just got hacked. It was the North Koreans. I'm going to go to the FBI. I don't expect you guys to know that, but what I do expect you guys as responsible IT people is to partner with us, the ECTF, or with anybody, EY, and find out who your law enforcement component is to help investigate that. And are you required to notify law enforcement? Because a lot of times, obviously, with infrastructure like dams or power or banks, you're required by law to notify law enforcement. but notifying law enforcement, are you calling, LAPD's Western Division? And I made the joke earlier was, I need to record one of those phone calls when you call a desk sergeant to report you've been hacked. It's quite interesting. But all joking aside, there is a component to who to call, and that's where I think the benefit of eCTFs come in, because you're not calling DHS, you're calling Geoff, or you're calling Hank, or you're calling Steve. We have a trusted partnership, like we have a trusted partnership. You can bounce ideas off me. So that's kind of the benefit of the eCTF.
And is that different from the ISACs? So
Totally different, yeah. So ISACs we are a law enforcement component, but the eCTFs partner with ISACs, with financial institution, with EY, with movie industries. It kind of depends on the city. Like here in LA, we have a bigger movie industry, so we have a lot more of the studios, but we also have University of Southern California. We have all the financial institutions. If there's an ISAC, so like our New York office is bigger with the FS ISACs for financial services, but the different ISACs, we should have a good partnership. The city of LA is the first city to have a CICC. I think it's the only city. Don't quote me on that. But I think it's the only large city. So like New York, Chicago, Miami, they don't have those CICCs. LA and Mayor Garcetti has started that, and it's been we are decades ahead, and with the Olympics coming,
Yep.
it'll be very good, so.
Yeah, okay. So maybe you want to talk about the next slide. I think it's about the enemies.
Yeah, so the enemies, and it's kind of a progression from sophisticated to non-sophisticated. And is everyone familiar with these enemies? I mean, we go from state to organized to insiders to hacktivists. And really the top three are probably your biggest threats. Equating these to criminal activities, I would say script kiddies are like taggers. They're people. They have low budget, they're used in common exploits. They're basically young to a hacker community. They're just trying to get a name out, just like some guy would write, Bob was here. But they've been some of them have been very effective because we want to tell war stories. So one of the war stories, we went after a DDoS attack. It was a joint task force case, FBI was involved. It was a DDoS attack here in LA. It was pretty big, like it took down an AT&T network. We thought like, man, it's pretty big. So we tracked the IP address back to a house, we execute the warrant, and, we did our due diligence for investigators, and we knew, okay, it's this guy. 20-year-old guy, he was a drug dealer, blah, 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 long history of crime, but nothing in the cyber. So we go in there, we execute the warrant, we start talking to people. We see the computer, okay? We check it, okay, this is the computer that was used to carry out the attack. So we talk to the father. He says, no, that's my younger son's computer. He's the only one that used it. Turned out to be a 13-year-old kid. He used the DDoS attack because I forgot the game. This was like 8 years ago. He wanted to beat his friends in an online gaming. So he did a DDoS attack to slow down their network so he could win. No real malicious intent, but because he was so heavily involved in the karting community, or in the gaming community, he saw Grand Theft Auto, and he saw oh, I can buy credit card information online. So he bought stolen credit card data to buy the equipment to carry out the DDoS attack, which wasn't a lot.
And I think,
Yeah.
They recruited the kid?
Yes, wasn't NSA, but some of our partners did pull him aside and pulled his father aside and said, look, this kid has a promising career. He really does. I mean, all kidding aside.
If he chooses the right side.
Yeah, if he chooses the right side. So choose the path wisely.
Yeah, and I think there was also a recent case just a few months ago that hit the news where this relatively young kid, like 16 or 18, was able to hack into a large organization and steal the entire database, including usernames and passwords. And he was able to do that based on a very simple vulnerability on their website. So, I mean, script kiddies, even though we call them kiddies, can still cause a lot of damage, right?
And most of the hackers we see are very young. So hacktivists, again, little lower down in the sophistication and money, but they're politically motivated. Where I've seen them is more from our protective side, where they're recruiting for protesting various protectees, but still very effective. One of the hacks we did work was a company called LA Police Gear. Obviously, LA Police Gear, they thought they were targeting just law enforcement, so they hacked in, got the customer database and put that on their website, said, hey, these are all the cops and here are their home addresses, which was concerning for us. We did not recruit them because they were more grown up, but generally they're a little older, not as sophisticated, but maybe they jumped down from previous hackers. They just don't have the financial support or the support from governments, so.
Yeah.
Insiders. Insiders, I think, is probably, I don't know, I think it's probably your biggest threat, both accidental and malicious. One of the things that we talk about later is you're going to fire somebody, and the IT person is usually the first person to know that person's being fired, because hopefully they're taking off their credentials. But we worked a very good case. It was, it was we'll call it a management company, and they had some proprietary software. The guy got fired. He knew he was getting fired, but they didn't take his credentials away, his login credentials, for like a month. He was able to get on the network, took the proprietary software, and then sold it.
And I have to say, it reminds me of a case where actually the IT leader was going to be let go a couple of days later, and the entire IT organization was preparing for what steps he's going to take in order to gain access back and try to cause some damage to the company. So I think it was definitely an interesting example for insider threat.
Also, in your IR response, you should be careful, because usually when there's a failure in your cybersecurity, it may be the IT guy that didn't do something. So don't go blindly like, oh, the IT guy's going to save me. He may have been the problem. He may be covering up. Not that he did something malicious, but he didn't do something he was supposed to do. So that is an insider threat. We had a company that we work with a lot that rewards good cyber hygiene. They have like ice cream social, you get, and paying your employees well. So a lot of these companies where we see the insider, 80% of them are done during work hours. So you're paying them to mess up your network. Okay, organized crime. We'll get in, Maxic is a case study we're going to talk about. And the intent of Maxic is to scare you. There is an army out there. We interviewed a hacker. He says the first thing he does in the morning is he gets up and he looks for the updated vulnerability patches, because he wants to see, okay, they've identified this, but what didn't they identify? This is an army that's out there. They are out there to steal from you. Again, cyber's that tool. And I think the nice thing we'll talk about Maxic is it was the human interaction that we were able to get them. Cyber is the tool to steal something from you. And what it is, it depends on that organization. But that organization is not a state-sponsored, but they're tied together somehow. There's a common language. There's a lot of Russian hackers. You're not going to get into that group. None of us, well, I don't know about all of you guys. I'm not going to get into that group going online and pretending I'm a hacker. I don't know the vernacular. I don't speak Russian. I don't have credentials. It's vetted. I mean, just because this is on the internet, don't assume that this is not a criminal organization. This is the same as you going into a bar and having a conversation with some guy. He's going to know right away you're a cop. So this is an organized group. If they need something, if I'm a hacker, but I don't have a tool, I'm going to go to some guy that manufactures that tool. And I'm just a hacker to get into that network. Somebody may have hired me to steal, the formula for Coke.
So what's really the motivation for these organized crimes, based on your experience?
Money. Money is I don't think, notoriety maybe. So when we talk about Maxic, they'll talk about big hacks. They want to get their name out there so they can make money.
Yep.
So.
And I will say, I think it's very interesting. When you look at the big data breaches over the past few years, there's one particular group that I've been following, and you can really see them shifting from one company to another. So once they get exposed, we could see them pivoting to the next company and create this timeline of companies that were basically hacked by the same group. No, I can't share these details. I'm sorry, that's confidential. But it is interesting, and there's a lot of information on the internet. If you're interested in that group, happy to share it after the talk.
And then state-sponsored, I think we're all very familiar, North Korea, Iran, Russia. If I were an agent in Iran, giving this lecture in Iran, I'd probably say the United States. They're out there, they're highly sophisticated, highly motivated, trained, state-sponsored training, unlimited budget, I think.
And I really think that's what differentiates them from everyone else, right? Everyone else may give up if they don't get to where they want to get, but the state-sponsored, I think unlimited budget is probably the way I would describe it, especially if you have a specific target you're going after.
So we bring these up so you guys know your enemy. I would say most of you guys, if you have a politically sensitive product that you sell, maybe it's a hacktivist. If you're selling credit card data, it's financial. You have to figure out what that is and who your enemies are and build your plan around it.
Okay. Great. So I think the next slide, we just quickly wanted to discuss a very, I think, common belief. And the bottom line is that you cannot avoid being hacked. Like, this is something that we used to talk about maybe 20 years ago, prevention. That's old school. And I keep pitching to my clients, whether it's financial organizations, healthcare, retail, like that's no longer relevant. And so it comes down to these 5 questions. And it really starts with the bottom. Do you know what you have? What are these assets? I think during the keynote lecture earlier today, we heard that you need to protect your assets and identities. But what are those? And do you really have a map? Once you know that, are they vulnerable? What's the way to get to these assets? And often when I talk to organizations, they keep saying, oh, we have the best defense around our database or around our domain controller. Well, that's great, but what else is supporting it? What else enables the business to keep operate? And then number 3 is really around what are some of the threats to these key assets, whether it's a denial of service attack, whether it's a malware campaign, destructive malware that we're going to touch on during the lecture today. And then I think to summarize it is if one of these threats actually happened, would you know? Do you have the right detection capabilities in place? And nowadays, and I think this is something you can relate to as well, we're doing a lot of work with our clients around GDPR. GDPR and incident response, anyone knows how much you're going to get fined if you fail to report a data breach within the 72-hour time frame? Yeah. So the number, that's good. It's either 20 million euros or 2% of your annual revenue, whichever is greater. And so the numbers are really significant. And failing to detect an incident can cause that issue. So we just brought here a list of some of the common assets. It varies from one organization to another. But I would highly encourage you, as you think about what are some of the things we can do, to look at that list and see how it applies to you. Now, here we have a list of questions that we are usually asked during an incident. No particular order. And I think we were going to focus on a few of those. Obviously, the list is very long. I think, to me, one of the most important questions is, how come we fail to detect it? Often, our clients are being notified about the incident by law enforcement or an external security vendor that says, hey, we think you have an issue. And so it always comes down to what we could have done to mitigate that risk, or why we're being notified by someone external? I mean, Geoff, what are some of your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so a lot of times we'll be contacted through either an undercover operation or we're working with another company that the network's been breached. They're using your company to attack his company, but those are kind of how we are notifying you. But we're not getting a lot of information from the private sector on breaches. So that was, if we could get more of that, that would be beneficial.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Even with was it 20 million euro?
Yes.
Yeah.
Significant.
Are there any questions that you're often being asked?
Yeah, so, yeah, what do we know about the attacker? Is it state-sponsored? As far as regulatory, so for us, we deal a lot with credit card information. So there's PCI compliance. Any PCI people? Okay. It's almost impossible to be PCI compliant, but we're contacted by the bank saying, company, mom and pop pizza shop, we're breached. We notify them, like, yeah, we know about it, but they don't. There's no follow-up for the regulatory, for the PCI police. I'm not the PCI police, but there's no follow-up. Yeah.
Okay. Now, from your experience, what are some of the questions that the top burning issues that you're dealing with? I mean, I know we have few professionals here in the audience.
Well, I guess the biggest question is why aren't organizations doing data classification in the first place? So most of them haven't done it. I mean, most of them don't know where their crown jewels are because they haven't really clearly identified them in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you get them to do that? In my case, I'm local government.
Yep.
Most of my information, if you ask me for it, I'll just give it to you. There is data that is protected, either HIPAA data, PCI data, or confidential legal data, regulatory data. But most of it is just same as your federal freedom of information. California, we have the Public Records Act. You can just ask for it. But we've taken the time and trouble to go to figure out what our important pieces of data are. But most organizations, most private sector people I talk to haven't. They'll just spout off the top of their head, oh yeah, we keep track of our finances. And we thought about encrypting it, but it slows things down, and we don't want to spend the money, but we don't want to lock ourselves out of our own data. So, how do we get them to think more about what is important to them and then to spend that time and effort? Because most of them don't.
Mm.
Yeah, I would say it's going to go back to regulatory. I think that's the only way. Just as credit cards, for example, everybody pushes the buck down the line.
Right.
The banks.
And it's a voluntary standard. To some extent.
Yeah.
They'll take away your ability to process.
But even with like PCI, there's really no enforcement.
Right.
They need to go after. So when we detect these breaches, they need to go after those people financially. I think the larger breaches, they've gone after the businesses financially, saying you didn't secure the network. But with these smaller businesses, they're almost negligent to a point where it's eye-related as you left your cash register wide open and you left the front door unlocked and you told the guy that I'm not going to be there from 10 o'clock at night till 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
So I think regulatory.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, we see the shift with GDPR. By the way, everyone know what GDPR is, right? Okay, great. So basically with GDPR, you have the 72-hour notification window, right? And you have these huge fines. We expect other regulatory bodies to follow and expect organizations to enforce that, not just for GDPR, but also PCI, HIPAA, etc. So unfortunately, I think that will be the way to force organizations to identify these crown jewels. Okay. So a little bit about incident response, and we feel like we've been talking a lot today about events and incidents and breaches, and I think it's just important to have a common language, especially around breach. So basically, an incident is any event that can cause a threat to your organization, and it can come from various ways. So, for example, as we discussed earlier, denial of service or malware attack would be considered an incident because they pose a threat to the organization. Breach is actually a subcategory of incident, that's a way to look at it, that involves data. So our often we see organizations trying to stay away from saying, oh, we have a data breach, because then you're going to have to be compliant with certain regulatory requirements. And they will call it a data incident or a privacy incident, doing everything they can to avoid using the term breach.
Well, there's some protections from that. So like if you do have a quote-unquote breach, but that data was encrypted, it isn't a breach because it's no longer readable, so you don't have to describe it as a breach, but it would have been an incident. So that's part of going back to the regulatory standards. They've kind of put these weasel languages in there, allowing people to basically game the system. So I can say I didn't have a breach because whatever data I took was taken in an encrypted format. Bam, I'm done. So, but I had a breach.
So that's open for discussion. I think that's a great point. According to GDPR, if the data is encrypted, you may not have to report it, for example, if you have a ransomware attack. But if it has impact on the availability, then it's a different discussion because it has impact to the rights and freedoms of individuals. So there's no one clear answer, unfortunately. That's really where you will bring in your outside counsel and consult with them rather than trying to make these individuals' decisions yourself. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about the attack kill chain and what we saw in a lot of these big data breaches. And I think what makes it easy for attackers is that we as organizations fail to implement these basic, and we talked about it earlier, these are now just basic security practices that you would expect organizations to follow. But before we talk about these tactics, just quickly going over the playbook. And this is really what we saw in all of the big data breaches we worked on. So attackers will find a way to get into the environment, whether it's via phishing email or maybe sending you a gift that you can then connect to your computer, deploying the remote access tool. And that's an area that I find fascinating. I don't know what's your experience here, Geoff, but basically 10 years ago, you would see malware deployed on each and every endpoint. And nowadays, what I see is attackers deploying malware on very few specific hosts. They're not trying to infect the entire organization anymore.
Correct. We're seeing it more carried out from a network, where it's not on your network anymore. It's on, his network, maybe in a foreign country, and the tools are all there, or the tools may be somewhere else. So, and then we're also seeing people allow remote access to a network, which we were talking about, like kind of the 4 or 5 things that every incident response, strong passwords, disabled RDP, all these things, and then it's at some point like, when is it going to stop? So, I don't know. When do you guys think it's going to stop? Is it going to stop? Anything from this side of the room? Okay.
Yep. So then once you get access to the environment, getting these basic user credentials, escalating them to domain controller and getting domain administrator privileges, from there going around the data and then exfiltrating it. Now you may think, oh, that's easy. Everyone do that. It should be so easy to detect. But if you look at the attack kill chain here at the bottom, what organizations fail to do is think, what are some of the steps that we should take in-house as defenders to break this chain? And so I think few of the mitigations that were mentioned earlier, again, a few years ago, it would have been controversial, but now it's almost like common practice. But the small and medium businesses are not able to implement them yet.
Correct. They either due to budget, laziness, or they're just not, it's the same password. Everyone has admin passwords. We looked at a network one time that their financial information was on, but the same network had their Wi-Fi for their business. And the password was like 123, which happened to be the administrative password. So, because they didn't want to inconvenience the client. And so that was one of the issues we run into.
Yeah. So I think really to break down the data exfiltration scenario, there are things you can do. If we have the time, I think we'll be able to go over a few of these recommended mitigations. But if not, please feel free to come ask us during the break. Now, I think we have a very special case study.
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Maxic was a very prolific hacker. He was a young guy. We didn't start out targeting him. We kind of, I guess we stumbled upon him. The case started out, anyways, Maxic was a Ukrainian hacker. He was responsible for the Dave & Buster and TJX hack. 45 million credit cards. That's a lot of credit cards. He specialized in debit and ATM cards. So debit and ATM cards in the carding community is the best because you can sell and you're getting instant cash. Whereas if you use a credit card, there's a whole list of the organization. You got to sell the credit card, you got to buy plastic, you got to buy an encoder, then you got to go have shoppers to buy stuff, then you have to resell the stuff, and then by the time you're actually getting money back, it's like maybe 10% of the value. So he was prolific because he got pins. Has anyone had their credit card compromised? Come on. Has anyone not had their credit card compromised? Really? You've never gotten a call that said, hey, I got your, wow, EY is good. I've had like 5 in the last couple of years between gas pumps and then that goes to the encryption. Well, that's getting off. That's a rabbit hole. We won't go down that one. But anyways, Maxic was a huge, huge hacker. So how we got there, we didn't get there by Maxic. We got there from our partnerships of the ECTF. A couple of banks, we had good relationships with the banks, and this was in 2000 when credit card, I didn't even know about cyber. I was doing a credit card case. I had graduated from counterfeit money to credit card case. So friendly with a bank investigator, he called and he says, hey, got this restaurant. He never even used the word hacked. Some credit cards were stolen. And before it was waitresses or waiters stole the numbers and then they used them. It was actually kind of a closed loop. But the POS system had used Aloha. Does anybody know Aloha? Aloha had just come out. The old way, you used to have to go through all the credit card slips, and the numbers were really small, and I had better eyes, and it was no problem. But you had to sit there in the restaurant looking, and then you had to find the server number, and you put all the 2s here and all the 5s here, and you'd figure it out that way. Well, with Aloha, which I thought at the time was the best thing since sliced bread, because I could run the credit card, it would instantly tell me, and I could cross-reference the waiter or waitresses, give me all the credit cards, and then I called the bank. So within like a day, this poor waitress had, instead of 2 or 3 credit cards, she had something like 8,000 credit cards she had swiped that had fraud on them. So anyways, she was very cooperative. She was a single mom. We went to talk to her / arrest her the day before Christmas Eve. We allowed her not to go to jail, and we told her to come day after Christmas to come see us. Very appreciative, and through law enforcement techniques, we were able to kind of move up the food chain or the kill chain, and identified one of the #1 distributor of credit card information who happened to be in San Diego, which is where the case started. But we just kind of backed into this. And the guy was a 3-striker. Meaning he was on his 3rd felony conviction, so he was going to prison for life for credit card fraud. It's not how the judicial system is supposed to work, but it worked in our benefit. Highly motivated. We were able to develop an undercover agent who jumped up the food chain. He now had credibility because where this system fails us as it's anonymous, like they don't know who we are, we can pretend to be somebody else. So we took advantage of that. We did some work for about a year, undercover online, at like 2 in the morning, because that's when Russia's awake and China's awake. It was hard. Anyways, established credibilities, did some huge buys. I mean, I always laugh because DEA, we did a $10,000 undercover buy, which was a lot. First undercover buy I ever did was $100. In a credit card case, my boss is like, yeah, can you see if you can get them for free? Like, it was $100. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I actually use my own money. But it was a significant buy, and the credit cards didn't show up for like 2 days. It's not a good feeling. Eventually, they did show up. It was 90,000 credit card numbers. 85,000 were legit. So it was a significant buy. We were able to kind of escalate to finally meet Maxic. We had done some of these buys, and we did other buys with some Chinese guys, and they introduced us, and we established credibility. and Maxick and our undercover just had a great time. They became very close friends, and we traveled all over the world. Eventually, he was arrested and sent to a Turkish prison. And it's the old joke, was the old airplane joke about being in a Turkish prison. It's true. And currently, he's still in a Turkish prison waiting for extradition. But that was Maxick. And he's not alone. He's an army, and he's out there to steal your stuff. Maxick just...
I want to ask
Yeah.
you a question. So how often do cases like this actually end up in prosecution?
Yeah, not a lot. This was, I worked on it for 4 years, and the actual prosecution happened 2 years after I had left, and my partner took it over. This, at the time, and, you know, because it was my case, I still think it's the best case Secret Service ever worked, but they have done some, at the time, this was the biggest case. We've done some big ones, but, yeah, this was our swan song. I mean, this was a long case. Yeah, this doesn't happen a lot.
Exactly.
So, and it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of false positives, and yeah, this doesn't happen. Just because a bank calls me, this guy's not going to jail, because it was a lot of luck. Well, it was total luck. I mean, it's just, and it was the other good thing about this, and this is where cyber, like we all think cyber, oh, it's big and it's nebulous. At the end of the day, somebody's behind the computer, and it's that guy. And he's got weaknesses. Just like they know we have weaknesses. You just need to figure out what his weaknesses are, whether it's gambling, women, men. You know, he's got to travel because he needs a heart surgery. We would never take advantage of that. But you got to get him out of these countries. So this isn't a state-sponsored hacker, but he knows where our extraditions lie. So he won't go to, well, he thought Turkey wasn't, he couldn't get extradited. The original plan to take him down.
Forget about NATO?
Yeah, well, the original plan to take him down was to have him go to Thailand. We were going to take a boat out to international waters and arrest him there, and then take him to a ship, a Navy ship, and then fly him to Guam. That was the original plan, but
Oh, well.
I was the only one that thought that was a good idea.
You just wanted a free ticket
Yeah.
to Thailand, didn't you?
Yeah.
Okay. So we just wanted to bring another topic for today's discussion, and this is around ransomware. Obviously, everyone saw maybe this screenshot, maybe something similar to it. But the bottom line is organizations are still being affected by ransomware. And I remember a specific case that we recently worked on where 30,000 computers were infected within less than 2 hours. The attackers were able to get into their patch management server. And so the patch management server was just about to release the recent patch to all of the hosts and servers across the organization. So I think it was very unique in a sense that so many computers were hit at the same time, and the recovery took multiple weeks. Now, there's a really interesting trend in industry that I'm seeing right now around having to establish a wallet where companies work with their outside counsel to facilitate that wallet in case they need to pay ransom. Now, I want to be very clear. We do not encourage companies to pay. I'm just sharing this trend with you in case you haven't been exposed to it. But basically, getting the Bitcoin is going to take time. And if you have 48, 72 hours, then these companies want to be prepared. So I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts here. I know we discussed it earlier.
So to quote Secret Service, Secret Service and FBI do not endorse paying the ransom. A study came out on Monday from one of the bank investigators that said 50% of the key of the encryptions you don't receive the key to unencrypt it. So we don't endorse it. The reason is, one, it promotes bad behavior. They'll either further escalate and keep asking for more money, and then you don't actually get the encryption keys. What we do endorse is backups. It's always fun to call the IT guy. You didn't back up your hard drive? You're like, yeah. Has anyone seen ransomware on their companies? Okay. But Renana brings up a good point, and we'll get into it. Like when we talk about IR and having a plan. We worked a case. I guess it's been 2 years, and they didn't know. They decided they were going to pay the ransom. I think it was like 10 Bitcoin. So it for the company, it wasn't a lot of money, and they're like, just pay it, let's move on. But they didn't know how to get it. And there was a debit machine. They're not allowed to call them ATMs. The U.S. Attorney told us not to call them ATMs anymore. They're kiosks because they're not endorsed by the financial institution, and it's money laundering. So the guy that went to go pay it only had like a $200 limit on his credit card. So it took him like a week to get enough money to get the Bitcoin. And they brought us all these receipts, and we're like, what are these? Well, this is the Bitcoin payoff. And I'm like, okay.
And you know what? I worked a case where the company decided they wanted to pay the Bitcoin, and again, we're against it. And then they reached out to the outside counsel and said, okay, we're ready. We want to pay 10 Bitcoins. And then outside counsel figured out that the account was actually compromised. Someone hacked into the outside counsel Bitcoin account and stole the money from it. So they weren't able to even pay it. So again, we're not recommending that you set it up, but if you do, make sure you have some protections around your wallet as well. Now, given that we only have 2 minutes left, I think we're just going to wrap up with a very quick story that is so relevant for now. And this time of the year, we see a lot of companies falling victim to what we call a W-2 fraud or business email compromise, basically gaining access to the company's CEO or one of the other executives, and then using this access to impersonate him or her and ask the HR department to provide them with the W-2 forms for the entire company. Now, you may think to yourself, nah, this can't happen. It happens every time. It especially happens to companies that don't use multi-factor authentication for their email accounts and they're using cloud-based providers. So I do want to make sure that if you haven't filled your taxes yet, do it now, because the chances are if your company falls victim, this increases the likelihood. But also, I think the bottom line here is really what kind of controls do you have around access to your email accounts? And if someone accidentally or not so accidentally accessed your email account, would your security team know about it? So I think, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, we see this a lot, not just with W-2s, but also for real estate industry, the large transfers. But if people would just take a second to actually look at the email and bring it up instead of just looking at the pane, you'll see that there's something wrong with the email. The way that the verbiage is. There was a friend of mine, he told me, and I totally forgot the word, but there's a word that's never used in the written form. It's only used orally. And they put that word in for their email to block. He said if that word is on an email, block it, put it in the spam. So there's ways to do that to prevent these. But these are, if this happens, and I don't even think 72 hours is enough time, if you're not contacting law enforcement or have something set up with the financial institution, that money is gone. Mm-hmm. And even if you can stop it, you're probably only getting 50% of it back. And we're talking like, these are wire transfers of like $1 million.
Yep.
You know, it's usually for like a house sale or something like that.
Yeah, and we actually worked a case last year where the attacker was able to get 400,000, like the first attempt. And then a few days later, they came back and got another 350,000. So, I mean, I don't know how much you guys make, but that's obviously a lot of money that you can make in a relatively short period of time. Yeah, I mean, I'm not judging if you guys are making this kind of money, but I think it's so easy to mitigate the risk and to implement the right controls in the environment, whether it's around your email process or whether it's around sharing information and who it can go to. So I think we're just on time. What we tried to cover during the lecture today is really some of the common use cases we've seen. There are others that we weren't able to share since the time was so short. But we're hoping you can take some of these, think them through, and if you have any questions, we're going to be around here for a few more minutes. So feel free to stop by. Thank you all.